County. So,
Thank you, Chair Brocklin, Van Brocklin. My name is Dave Hageberg. For the record, I'm the chair of the Yamhill County Parkway Committee. I'd like to just take a moment and thank Paul Mather for the incredible contribution he has made in all the years we've worked together on the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. To bring you up to speed on that in 3 minutes is beyond Herculean. I won't try. I want to tell you that we're in the process of preparing a 4-page brochure that we will get to you that I think will explain a lot of the background and the significant issues. So I won't try to do that other than to say that I've been chair of the Parkway Committee for a little over 30 years from now. Yamhill County created that Parkway Committee to deal with the congestion of traffic in Newburgh and Dundee, and so we've been particularly successful. The project extends from Dayton all the way past Dundee, past Newburgh, connecting back to Highway 99W. As of now, the first phase from the middle piece from McMinnville side of Dundee to Highway 219 has been completed. ODOT has probably never, ever built a project that has been so unanimously accepted, appreciated. It is 100% accolades for that project and the work that you've done. But we need to do some additional parts to that. Next piece is from Highway 219 connecting back to 99W. One of the consequences of that, and I've given you some papers and documents, you'll see there's an article from the Newburgh Graphic about the traffic consequences on county roads across Marion County, a letter from the Marion County Commissioners, and from letters from 4 different legislators. But the sum total of it is the law of unintended consequences. When you build the first phase and you don't finish it, you get to 219, people make a decision. Do you go back through a couple of miles of city streets in Newburgh to get to 99W? Or do you go east, go across the Willamette River, take McKay Road, and go to the Aurora-Donald interchange? And that's what a lot of has happened. The traffic has increased significantly on that McKay Road. In the last year, for example, there's been approximately 10 deaths and a lot of significant injuries. And so the Marion County Commissioners and the legislators are all urging that this next phase and the final, get the whole project done. Recall that this highway is one of the few Oregon projects that it's a federally designated as a high priority corridor. It is the most significant project in rural Oregon that needs to be completed. The commissioner and the mayor will talk about that briefly, but we're here to ask you to look at every opportunity. We need $32 million more to buy the rest of the right-of-way for 219 to Rex Hill. We've got the money for design. We need to finish buying the right-of-way so we're shovel-ready and eligible for enhanced federal funding. And so with that, I will turn it over to Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Dave.
thank you, Dave, very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Van Brocklin and Chair Van Brocklin and the Oregon Traffic Commission. It's a privilege to be here among you today. And what I thought I'd talk about a little bit is about just some really facts where what I'll say where the rubber meets the road as far as this project goes. And a lot of these facts come from Pat O'Connor, who is an economist with the state of Oregon. But, you know, Yamhill County is best known for the wine industry. We have now in Yamhill County, we have over 250 wineries, and we're the largest contributor to Oregon's $6 billion wine industry. And that's all since 2001, so that's quite a significant growth. But what I want to talk to a little bit is that many people are surprised that Yamhill County has the second greatest concentration of manufacturing jobs in 6 counties. The only one that has more is Morrow County, and manufacturing accounts for 20% of the total county employment, which in Morrow County it's 36%, and Morrow County mostly stems from agricultural manufacturing like Lamb Weston and everything, but Yamhill County is the second largest. The largest industrial category, believe it or not, in Yamhill County is miscellaneous manufacturing. We have companies such as ADEC in Newburgh, who is a world-class dental equipment manufacturing company. Meggitt Polymers and Composites in McMinnville, which makes the vast majority of gaskets and seals for Boeing for their large aircraft. And in Yamhill County, the western part of the county is best known for its lumber, with Hampton Lumber having an extremely big part of that lumber industry in the state of Oregon. The fast-growing wine industry has only not changed the face of agriculture in Yamhill County, but has also altered the profile of its manufacturing. On an annual basis, the average beverage industry employed 320 workers in 2001, plus seasonal workers. That is now, in 2018, has been over 1,000 annual workers with many more seasonal workers. That's an increase of over 300%. Food manufacturing has grown from employment of less than 500 in 2001 to more than 750 jobs in 2018, and those include such as Betty Lou's in McMinnville, who's a large snack bar manufacturing, to St. LaCroix in Newburgh, who does a lot for the Japanese export market. We have plastics, rubbers, rubber products, UAVs, primary metals, fabrication, very diverse, such as Freeland Wade, who makes a large amount of coiled hose for pneumatic operations in the United States, Climax Portable Tools in Newburgh, and Northwest UAV in McMinnville. So I'd like to finish by saying it's imperative that we get that $32 million so we can finish that design, because we're being excluded from federal funds because they want shovel-ready projects, and we're not to the point where we are shovel-ready. So I'd encourage the commission to do anything they can to help find that additional $32 million. Excuse me, Rick Olson, I'm the chair of the Yamhill County Board of Commissioners.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Chair.
My name is Scott Hill, and I'm the mayor of McMinnville, chair and commission. It's great to be back in front of you. Dave and I and Rick have had an opportunity at previous times. What I'd really like to share a little bit is, in spite of the name, the Newburgh-Dundee bypass, what we're talking about is a regional bypass that connects Portland to the Central Coast. If you've ever gone to Lincoln City, you know the congestion that can happen in that area. And as Dave has indicated, we have had tremendous success with phase one, but we've moved bottlenecks to other locations. You know, if we don't finish what we start, we've created bottlenecks. Dave's talked a little bit about McKay Road going over to I-5 and the deaths that are happening there. That county road is not made for the kind of traffic that's going on it, especially at nighttime. No lights, there's no shoulders, and it's just a hazard waiting to happen. Let me share just a little bit from our perspective in McMinnville, and I also speak for Newburgh. Commerce has started to move again a bit until it gets to these chokeholds. And as Rick has indicated, Commissioner Olson indicated, we're a thriving industry where we are very diverse in what we're able to bring to the table. An area that we've had great success over the last number of years is tourism. We are the heart of Willamette Valley wine, and every weekend people are coming to McMinnville to spend time in the wineries, the tasting rooms, and the cuisine that's found in McMinnville. One aspect that we like to bring to the forefront is the thought that in the state transportation plan, resiliency and emergency is very important. And McMinnville is found right in that hub of, if something were to happen with the Cascadia, a 9-point, then people would be coming to us. We know that Spirit Mountain is a place where people can gather, but we also know that with our airport in McMinnville, which is a Class 2, Tier 3 airport, that we're going to be used as a staging for emergency supplies. And the bypass being built to those standards are going to allow us to bring those needed supplies in. Again, this year we've been very busy as a Parkway Commission. We've gone to Washington, D.C. We've talked to our legislators in Washington, D.C. We've been to Salem. The governor had put us in her budget, and those monies were taken away. But our ask is very simple. We need $32 million. We need to be able to continue to buy right-of-way so that phase 2 can continue. It's so critical to this project, and that's where we are today. We know that from time to time there are little pockets of money, and that's our ask as we build towards being able to be shovel ready so that we can participate in federal funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Questions of the panel from the commissioners? I want to say that I've been out there many times, and I think the improvement we have made out there has made a very significant difference. But we also understand it's only a piece of the entire project. There are still segments to be constructed, and we're anxious to work closely with you to complete the project and try and leverage federal funding, as you've all said. I will add one personal point, which is my wife and I have 3 daughters, the eldest of which got married in Yamhill County last September. So I just want you to know that I did everything I could last year to increase economic inflow out of my checking account into your county.
And we appreciate that, Chair.
And we will commit to you that we will continue, and how much we have appreciated the partnership and the relationship that we've had as a community and as a region with the Department of Transportation. And we will get you that information, but thank you for the continued support and working with us.
We'll look forward to the brochure, and thank you, Dave, in particular, for keeping in such close contact with me on this, and look forward to more of that. Okay, thank you very much. I think that concludes the public comments portion, so we're going to move on to Oregon Legislative Key Performance Measures with Assistant Director Brower and Phil Case. So this is Oregon Legislative Key Performance Measures. You might just give us 15 seconds on that for the benefit of really all of us.
That was exactly the plan, Chair Van Broecklyn. For the record, I am Travis Brower, the Assistant Director for Public Affairs, and Mr. Case is on the staff in the Director's office. So I'm going to give you the really brief, high-level overview, particularly for Commissioner Smith, as this is her first time engaging on this topic, and then Mr. Case will go through in greater depth. So you may recall that HB 2017 modified how we do key performance measures and really put the commission in charge of developing the key performance measures for ultimate legislative approval and monitoring ODOT's performance on those measures. So the process we go through in order to develop the key performance measures is that the commission's Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee is charged in statute with making a recommendation on a set of key performance measures that then go to the commission for your review and approval. Ultimately, it is the legislature that ratifies and enacts them in our budget. However, the legislature generally will accept what it is that the commission puts forward, assuming you've done your homework, which of course we will work with you to ensure that that is the case. HB 2017 also requires that there's an annual report to the OTC on the status of how we're actually doing in meeting the goals of our key performance measures, and that's why we're here today. So you are going to get that report today in both verbal format, but we have also, for the first time, put together a more of a summary of our key performance measures that lays out how we're doing in all of these areas, whether we're making progress, whether we've met our goals, how we're doing compared to a longer term average. So you can take some of the noise out of the annual fluctuations and oscillations and see, are we doing better than we have been over a longer term in the past? So Mr. Case will walk you through that over time. The other thing I should note is that the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee, on which Chair Van Broecklyn currently serves and which was chaired by Chair Boehne before she left, is working through the process of updating the key performance measures. We've had a couple of workshops with them and a couple of discussions. We're working through these by the different areas, and then we will be back in the spring with a recommendation from the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee that the Commission will be able to approve, review, modify, et cetera, that will go into our budget submission and then goes to the legislature for their ultimate approval in that process. So now I will turn it over to Mr. Case, and he will give you the in-depth version of all of this.
Good morning, Chair Van Broecklyn, Commissioners, and congratulations, Vice Chair Simpson. I'm here today, like Travis said, to talk about the legislative key performance measures. And as he also said, on behalf of the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee. Get this slide. Ah, thanks. Maybe we'll do this slideless. Can you click the slide for me?
I'll go grab it.
There we go. Okay. As Travis alluded to, there are hundreds of agency key performance measures. We're here today to talk about legislative key performance measures, which there's currently 17, and there's a little bit of overlap with the federal PMs. We're not going to, thank you, not talking about those today.
How many state workers does it take
All right,
to
how
turn
many does
on
it?
a,
You know, I used to fly airplanes. I can't figure this out. Okay. Anyway, all right, here we go. And Travis also talked about this. We're developing them and we're reporting them here today. So I'll continue to go through these. What you see before you is the currently approved legislative key performance measures. There are 17 of them. The list that's on this slide and the next slide, of course, is what was requested April of last year and approved June of this year. So that's the list that we're looking at, and you will hear about today in more detail. Okay, so of the 17, we'll be talking about trends and targets a little bit on the next slide. But as you can see, when it comes to targets, some are aspirational. So we may not hit the target. We're shooting for those targets, and that's okay to miss your target, particularly when it's aspirational, although that's what your goal is ultimately. Trends matter. If you're trending down, that's not good, or worsening, depending on the measure. There is a certain amount of noise, like Travis talked about, so we have to be aware that as we go from year to year, some are going to be up, some are going to be down. And so we have to, take a statistical look at what is the data showing. Is it within natural variation, or is it something more? And if it is down, let's take another harder look at it, and we'll talk a little bit more about those here in a second. All right, this slide outlines all of our key performance measures that we're reporting on today. Due to time, I'll be focusing on the ones in the lower right-hand corner of those that are off target and worsening, because that's what's highlighted as things that we definitely need to take a harder look at. As you can see, construction projects on time, certified firms, passenger rail ridership, and traffic congestion are all those that we're going to be focusing on a little bit more. I will notice, or I will point out that the gray text represents those key performance measures that we work greatly with our external partners on. So we don't necessarily control that performance, but we do like to say that we have some amount of influence on them. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that as well. And here's that list of 4 and what they are. Okay, so at this point, I'll talk briefly about these 4 measures and then invite any division administrators in the room that want to speak up about it to please join us and add to the discussion. As you can see, construction projects on time, we have a long history of this. And in 2018, we had to decline down to 66%. You can see the natural variation in the performance measure. That being said, though, we'd been relatively stable at 75%, but it's going in the wrong direction. So what are we doing about it, right? That's really the bottom line. And so, we've taken a deep dive on many of these construction projects, and where can we make improvements? What are changes to these projects that are affecting the timeliness of them? Some are weather-related, there's all kinds of different factors that go into this, but so we said, well, let's be smart about how we plan these projects. And so what we're doing, starting actually this fall, is there's additional training that's going into best practices to plan around weather events and those seasonal projects. A great example is, not planning to finish a project that has a whole lot of landscaping in January or December. That would be a good example of probably not the best way to plan out a project. I'm way oversimplifying it, but that's an example that you could use. So now, we know that this is something we need to focus on, and so the folks in our highway division and our regions are working hard to figure out where we can make improvements. And as we know, it does take time to see the benefit of these changes in this training and some of those processes that we put in place. So that's kind of where we're at with this construction projects on time, key performance measure.
I will take the performance measure around certified firms. This is one that last year was one of our shining stars. It was actually one where we made the greatest progress and it greatly exceeded our target. This year, we have not met the target, though, as you note, we did increase that target for 2018. This is one that we had a discussion a bit last year with Commissioner Simpson in particular, where we, in this one, focus on minority, women, emerging small business, and service-disabled veteran enterprises. That is the state designation out of our COBID office, and this performance measure is intended to be consistent with other state agencies at the enterprise level and how the governor's office has asked us generally to measure our success with certified firms. However, it is very different than our federal DBE or disadvantaged business enterprise measure. This one focuses on our state-only funded contracts, whereas our DBE measure that we've had reported in previous years until we standardized to this enterprise level measure is focused on just a different, focus on federally funded projects. State-funded projects are a fairly small portion of our portfolio. So one of the discussion points that we're going to be having with the Continuous Improvement Advisory Committee, and which we'd welcome any feedback from the Commission today or at a later date, would be whether this is the right performance measure. Commissioner Simpson, to your point, I think we have Angela Crane will be coming and giving an update for the Office of Civil Rights in the near future. We want to work through this particular question. Are we measuring the right thing? If not, the results that you're seeing may not be as meaningful as they could be. I also wanted to talk a little bit about passenger rail ridership. This is one where we have seen challenges in recent years with declining ridership. Now, some of this is specifically related to the derailment that we saw in Washington toward the end of 2017, which caused a significant drop-off in ridership in 2018, and unfortunately, ridership in 2019 is not recovering. What we find with passenger rail ridership is that it is highly dependent on a number of factors. One is the frequency of service. We only have 2 round trips a day, so it doesn't lend itself to great ridership. Second is the travel times. If you can be competitive with driving, then people are more likely to use passenger rail. And we've made improvements to the system that do make it more efficient and effective. But really, I think the key factor that we're seeing with these numbers is reliability. Any of you who've ever taken passenger rail know that it can be highly unreliable. The northbound trains that originate from Eugene generally operate at a very high level of reliability. However, the southbound trains coming out of Seattle, the reliability is just truly pathetic. So what we see is that people are willing to take the train northbound, but then they get stuck in Portland and oftentimes can have to wait an hour or more past their scheduled departure time. So we believe that that is a major factor in our challenges with ridership. We are working very closely with the railroads to try to drive better on-time performance. The challenge is that the on-time performance issues that are particularly hurting us are within the purview of Washington with the BNSF line. They received a very significant infusion of Federal Rail Administration funding to improve that line and increase frequency. Unfortunately, that has not led to the reliability metrics that we had hoped to see. The other note I would say is until we get all of the factors from the derailment worked out, we are currently still operating on 4 round trips a day between Portland and Seattle. Originally, the plan was to go to 6 daily round trips. Until we get back to 6 daily round trips, our schedule is not optimized. We changed our schedule to match those new round trips with WashDOT, and unfortunately, the derailment just completely knocked that off the tracks, both literally and figuratively. So we are having some challenges in this passenger rail arena because of on-time performance and because of the implications of the derailment.
And finally, traffic congestion. It's a new measure, as you can see. It was approved just this year. What we did is to set the target, we backcast the last couple of years looking at older data to determine what might be a good trend line to set as a target, understanding that the needs of the system are increasing greatly as more and more people move to the metro area in particular, while at the same time we have not built out the infrastructure much to accommodate that. So we understand that congestion is going to get worse. And so that's where we see the increasing trend line, I should say the target line. In 2017, we blew that up. This measure is particularly sensitive to economic growth and the price of gasoline and things like that. So we see that we've already hit our target for 2025. So as we go through over the years, we're going to probably refine this target to see what does the data show us. But what this does do is it shows at some very highly aggregated level what is congestion doing around the state. Most of it is in the Willamette Valley. Most of it is in the Portland metro area. One thing I will point out is because this is so highly aggregated, you can't really pick nuggets out of it too much. But what we are doing is we're working with our transportation development unit and our traffic planning unit to develop a mobility report that's going to go into detail much greater about which corridors are doing what, how they're performing, and what are the impacts of some of our projects around the state. And that'll help identify some of those areas about where we're performing well and where we need to continue to improve. But bottom line is this shows that, yes, you can see, not surprisingly, that congestion is getting worse over time. So that's kind of where we're at with this key performance measure. Like I said, it's brand new, and what it does is to highlight something that we already know, but it's important that we do talk about it.
Quick question. PK, since I just found out that's the nickname now, right?
Yes, sir. Forever.
So the blue line,
Yes.
with the goal. So are you saying that we're anticipating more congestion in the future, and those are the goal targets we want to stay at?
Well, because it's
Since
such a
that trajectory is obviously going up.
It is. That trajectory was based on the last couple of years' data. So we said, where's 2 points? Let's just, again, very, very roughly say, what do we think it's going to do? Now, we know that we're not doing a significant amount of building. We're not increasing the size of the system. And we know that people continue to move to Oregon because it's such a wonderful place to live. And so necessarily, we also know that congestion is probably going to build. If we see that we are increasing exponentially on this, well above what that target line is, then we know that we're falling behind worse and worse. 15 years, 10 to 15 miles at a time for every year, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're sitting in it, I mean, I live in Portland, so I'm telling you, I know it's painful. And there's a significant economic impact. So I think what this does, we just wanted to say, hey, do we have a key performance measure that talks about congestion? We didn't. And so now we do. And so what this does is this helps highlight that, and then that'll drive some of the discussion in the mobility report.
Chair Van Brockman, we were in a pre-meeting yesterday, and you had talked about how TriMet is been utilizing performance measurements related to mode share and how they're only accounting for 2%, and just talking about the impact of that move to 4 or move to 6. And I think that has a direct correlation to this particular conversation as well. And I'm wondering whether or not if it's worth our efforts, not necessarily focusing on congestion in its entirety, but more importantly, just mode share and how that allocation breaks down, and how are we measuring our impact on mode share shifts?
I think that's an extremely good point. I know that within the draft mobility report that I've seen, there's discussion about mode share, transportation options. Is it, how do people feel about commuting by bicycle? If you don't feel safe, you're not going to do it. You're not going to get out of your car. You're not going to do it. So that report focuses on mode share, and we obviously with increased funding for transit now, what is the impact of that? And like you said, 2% that's a big deal, or it could have a big deal. It could have a big impact. So yes, I would like to say that we could have further discussions on that. And when we provide our draft, I'd look forward to your feedback on what does that look like in our mobility report, and how can we use that to leverage some discussions about funding.
And Commissioner Simpson, we also do have a measure around transit ridership that measures whether we're making improvements in actual total transit ridership in the state or per capita transit ridership. This measure is designed to be a high-level overview of the outcome of all of our congestion relief strategies, which are both, this is both responsive to both demand side. Can we move more people by alternative modes or encourage efficient use of the system? Or on the supply side, are we building auxiliary lanes and other things that will benefit the transportation system? So obviously the strategy that we have in place is really an all of the above strategy. Move more people by transit, provide more transportation options, get more freight onto rail with intermodal facilities, but also look at auxiliary lanes and bottleneck relief, as well as pricing as a method to manage demand and to help pay for some of those. So ideally, we will see that this, perhaps there's a spike in 2017, 2018, with the economy likely slowing a little bit, we may see a change. And we've also brought some projects online in the last year or two. This is 2017 data that hopefully we'll start seeing at least some points on the system that are functioning better, particularly as we open a number of auxiliary lanes across Portland.
So I might just add on to Commissioner Simpson's comment and your responses. I think actually the number is TriMet's number is currently 4% ridership, and they're making efforts to increase that significantly. General Manager Kelsey previously was in Vancouver, BC during the time of the Olympics being there, and they made obviously a lot of investments preparing for the Olympic Games. Including a major infusion of investment in transit. My thought on this is that we ought to be, we maybe should be thinking about having a performance measure that gives us some sense of just mobility. I think ultimately this is a question of providing choice so that people have options, and we could start by looking at the passenger vehicle transit mode split. It would obviously require a lot of cooperation with other agencies of government, particularly the transit districts, but we can think about the details of this later, but some way to be measuring mobility and choice, because ultimately, as you just said, Deputy Assistant Director Brower, what we really need to be measuring here is whether we're giving people options for how they get around, and ultimately first mile to last mile. So really all of the steps, how do you get, if you're taking transit, for example, in Portland to the airport, how do you get to the transit station? How do you get to the airport on transit, whether it's rail or bus? So I think we ought to put a little thought into maybe having a measure that shows us mode split in a meaningful way so we understand how we're doing on developing out choices in the state. And maybe it's as simple to begin with as showing a passenger vehicle transit split just as a starting point, because it's biking, it's walking, it's a number of different choices. But if you started just as an initial point with keeping track of mode split between, and now that we're in the transit business really for the first time post House Bill 2017, I think that would be very instructive in terms of how we're doing with our investments and whether we are in fact providing the state's citizenry with meaningful choices for how they get around. We won't solve congestion without, as you said, all of the above, but we also have some way to see if we're, to measure and discuss how we're doing in terms of improvement on at least 2 or 3 different choice. So I was thinking passenger vehicle and transit is 2. There might be another, and then we can fill out that over time. But I think that's worthy of some additional discussion, maybe at the CIAC and beyond.
That could be an excellent portion of a mobility report. We could even provide that data at the regional, like MPO type level, maybe more meaningful than a statewide level.
Some way to disaggregate it.
Chair Van Rockland.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Brown.
So, of course, you knew I was going to jump in on the transit piece, correct?
Huge
But-
shock to me. You want to talk about transit?
But looking at the report and the mobility piece, you do collect the ridership, but I think that you can go dive a little deeper. And you're correct, Travis, when you talk about the MPO and the data that is actually gleaned at all of the MPOs on the use of transit. There is surveying that's done by passengers. So I think that we can come up with some goals, and we'll be able to flesh those out as we move forward with the STIF dollars.
Chair Rundle.
Commissioner Callery.
I think we've all seen an increase in transit opportunities across the state based on the funding coming out of House Bill 2017. But I'm wondering, do you aggregate that as one factor when you compare it to the congested lanes? Or do you break it down to, let's say, rural Oregon versus the metropolitan areas where the congestion is really the significant issue?
Commissioner Callery, that's exactly what we're going to try to get to in a mobility report, because this is so high level. It's appropriate for a key performance measure to be able to give you a starting point for conversation. But that mobility report, I think, will be able to dive down at that regional level. We have data on, and I was just looking at it the other day, Mr. Case provided to me, on all of the urban areas in Oregon and where the congested lanes are and the increase. We can provide that same data for transit and other modes in terms of that regional performance. So I think a mobility report that we're contemplating is something we'll want to bring for a discussion with the commission to make sure we're heading in the right direction and be able to provide you a much more granular level of detail so you can see, are we making progress in certain areas and not in others? Because there's a lot of detail that can go into how you actually achieve our goal and what strategies you put in place.
Okay, continue. Yes, we did.
Thank you for your time. That concludes our brief then.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, well, we'll move on. So the next item is a decision item for the commission. It's a recommendation from the Public Transportation Advisory Committee regarding the 2019-2021 STIF funding. And when we get to the vote, we have a fairly lengthy script here that was given to us last night. So everyone can find that so we can walk through the motions correctly. That would be great. Welcome this panel, and if you will introduce yourselves, that will be helpful.
All right. Good morning, Chair Van Brockland, Commissioners. My name is Marcia Hoskins. I'm the Public Transportation Manager for the Oregon Department of Transportation. I'm here on behalf of Hal Gard, the Rail and Public Transit Division Administrator, who's on the East Coast in a conflicting meeting. So we're all doing double duty. Here to present with me are STIF, Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund Project Manager, Karen Criswell, as well as Jeff Hazen, the General Manager of Sunset Empire Transportation District and the Chair of our Public Transportation Advisory Committee.
Thank you, welcome.
So the presentation that we're going to give to you today, as soon as it's up.
Marcia, you don't have this memorized?
I do have it memorized pretty much.
We've
been living
it
for
for 2 years. It's a leading question. I
right?
knew you had it memorized.
Yeah, so this presentation is on the remaining 2019-21 Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund plans for formula funding. We are here today to get the Commission's approval on the second round of STIF formula plans. If you'll recall, 18 STIF formula plans were submitted and approved by the Commission earlier this year. We have 22 formula plans in this second round for your approval. If your math brain is working, you'll realize that that's too short of the 42 total qualified entities. 2 tribal qualified entities, the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, as well as the Klamath Tribes, notified us that they are going to postpone submittal of their STIF plans until the 2021-23 biennium. their formula funds don't go away, they're held for them. So they're going to hold off, do some more planning on what they want to use these for, and then submit their plans for the 21-23 biennium. We'll also be giving you some information regarding the formula fund investments, both from the second round as well as in total, and the anticipated benefits and outcomes that we hope to get from this new funding. Before I jump in, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge my staff, Karen Criswell, our project manager, Jeff, and our Public Transportation Advisory Committee, as well as all the external transit providers that have just done a tremendous lift over the past 2 years to get this funding in place, rolled out, the planning done, the local processes completed, and the plan submitted. So I just wanted to state that for the record. The topics we're going to cover is we'll go over the available formula funding, talk a little bit about the decision-making process, the review and decision-making that went in to these plans. We'll share anticipated outcomes from the plan, and then the Public Transportation Advisory Committee recommendation on approval or rejection of these plans, as well as the schedule of the next steps. So the qualified entities developed their STIF plans based on a December 2018 estimate, and that's reflected in this slide as having an estimated $201.9 million available for formula fund, as well as $11 million for the discretionary and $9 million for the intercommunity discretionary fund. And that's the last 2 quarters of fiscal year 2019, as well as estimates for fiscal year 20 and 21. As you know, since that time, based on legislative direction from the 2019 legislature, we transferred $10.1 million of the STIF funds to the State Special Transportation Fund in order to maintain service levels, and that came out of the legislative direction for the ODOT approved budget. The impact of that particular transfer of $10.1 million, we hope, will be offset by the STIF transit tax revenues, which are coming in higher than expected from our 2018 initial estimate. And we're hoping that the fact that the tax collections are coming in higher than expected is going to allow the qualified entities to at least complete 100% of their submitted projects. As you'll recall, we asked them to submit up to 130% level with their formula plans, since we knew it was the first time out of the gate and we weren't sure how the funds were going to come in.
Hi, Karen Criswell, Rail and Transit Division. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the process. And the formula funding process starts with local advisory committees making recommendations to their governing bodies, who then make decisions and then submit their plans to ODOT. ODOT goes through a very rigorous review process on those submitted plans, brings that information to PTAC. PTAC appointed a subcommittee to advise them on the STIF plans. And then PTAC, as we are here today, brings their recommendation on whether to approve all or part of the plans to the commission. In this upcoming biennium, this is pretty exciting. So with the anticipated commission approval today, the total expenditures, looking at cycle 2, we're looking at $62 million in STIF funds requested, which will leverage an additional $33 million in other funds for a total of $95 million, with $685,000 to be carried forward to a future STIF plan period. So with the 2 cycles together for our first biennium, we're looking at an estimated $223 million in STIF formula funds, leveraging $72 million in other funds for a total project value of $296 million, with approximately $4.6 million being carried forward to a future cycle. So always my favorite part, looking at the measurable project benefits and outcomes. These are the outcomes that are anticipated from the formula funds. So you could see the cycle 2 additional numbers, and the total for 2019 and through 2021 is over 37 million new rides statewide. 37 million, that's a lot of transit rides, people. 215 million revenue miles, 254 new transit stops that are shared with other providers, which goes to improving the connectivity statewide when you have these shared transit stops. Over 490,000 new rides provided to students in grades 9 through 12. And another number that's pretty exciting to me is 294 transit buses purchased. Of those vehicles, 205 are gas or diesel, 89 are anticipated to be low or no emission vehicles. Another way to look at that data is that approximately 40% of those vehicles will replace existing vehicles that are no longer or approaching not being in a state of good repair, and about 62% are expansion vehicles, so new vehicles for new routes and new services. Some of the other anticipated capital investment outcomes are facilities constructed, expanded, or renovated, a total of 21, and then other equipment, which is a very large category that includes things like bicycle equipment, bike racks, shelters, signage, surveillance and security, charging infrastructure. One of the things that the legislature requires us to gather from the transit providers is how they're allocating their revenues across 7 criteria areas. 3 of them relate to improving service or otherwise assisting low-income passengers. So in total, or for cycle 2, excuse me, nearly 50% of the formula funds will benefit low-income households, low-income people. Low or no emission buses, approximately 12%. Improving service between communities, so again, our statewide connectivity, about 9%. Better coordination between providers to reduce the fragmentation of the system, approximately 3%. And 7% for students in grades 9 through 12. Some of you might recall that the legislature requires transit providers to expend at least 1% of their formula funds to improve student transit. So the cycle 2 providers exceeded that quite significantly at 7%. Another way to look at this data that us transit dorks find really useful is looking across 4 budget categories. And that's capital expenditures, so approximately 20 million or 32% on capital, operations at 62%, planning at 2%, and administration at 4%. So when you look at the allocations in total, both cycle 1 and cycle 2, the numbers are pretty impressive. And these do not total 100% because one project can have benefits in across multiple criteria, so it makes it a little challenging to take in. Approximately 75% will have benefits to low-income households. Nearly a third is buying low and no emission vehicles. 11% on improving services between areas, provider coordination at 5%, and student transit at 12%. So again, very well in excess of that 1% requirement. So the things that go into STIF plan approval considerations, we review for consistency with HB 2017 as amended by HB 4059 in the 2018 legislature, our Oregon administrative rules, as well as the commission's approved rejection considerations, which were approved by the commission in October 2018. And with that, Jeff will give you PTAC's take on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly share, this is round 2. We're excited about wrapping this up, but we've been seeing some great things out of the round 1 projects that have been going on. Chariots, for example, in Salem, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, started rolling out their weekend service, and it was met with
huge ridership numbers. Their buses were full, not just the ones within downtown area, but also the ones coming from the outside. Those buses were full too. People have been waiting for a long time in Salem area for weekend service, and we've got it. So that's going to, grow throughout the state as well. We just came from the National Rural Technical Assistance Program Conference in Portland that we were lucky enough to host this year. And on Sunday, I got to take a full bus load of transit professionals from across the country, rural providers and US DOT officials. I got to take them on a tour over to the coast, and as we're going along, I got to talk about the new funding, the STIF funding, and I got to share the numbers that Karen just shared with you, and the jaws just dropped on everybody's faces. They were so impressed with the investment that we're doing throughout the state of Oregon with transit, not just in urban areas, but also rural, and how many additional revenue miles and ridership. They were very excited for us. So we got to share some great things about transit in Oregon. So I'm here today as the chair of PTAC to forward PTAC's recommendation. We, in August, are recommending that all 22 STIF plans that are presented by the qualified entities be approved in their entirety, and that's what we're asking for from the commission.
Thank you all very much. Karen, could you go? Oh, are we not quite done here? Want to go through this?
Just the last one?
Yeah, sure.
Marcia?
Yeah.
Sure, just to talk really quickly with our next steps. We're on track to continue implementing the program. With this, we received this second batch of STIF plans, which, as I noted earlier, completes it. And the Commission's report to the legislature on implementation will occur by February 1st of 2020. So we'll be back in front of you soon with the recommended report to the legislature. But with that, we are requesting that the Commission approve the recommendation from the Public Transportation Advisory Committee to approve all of the second round 22 STIF formula plans in their entirety.
Thank you, Marcia. So we get questions from the commission here. I just was wondering if we could go back to the impact slide. Yeah. Yes, thank you. So it's not lost on me that we just had a conversation when we were talking about the KPMs, about mode split, about mobility, about congestion. All of those things tie together. This is the state addressing congestion, offering choices, and improving air quality, and a whole range of things that come out of just offering Oregonians choices for how they get around. The point about the buses being full in Salem, the Marion County areas, I'm sure just an indication of what happens when you give people choices, and the numbers are impressive. You look at 37.6 million new rides. You look at 500,000 rides for, I'll just say, high school students. Those are big numbers, and that is positively affecting congestion relief. That's positively affecting people's ability to get around in a number of ways. So this is just a great start in putting almost $300 million into this system. So I would applaud the governor and the legislature for putting this in the bill. This is real change. Real change comes from courageous leadership, and the legislature showed us that in 2017. It's our job to implement it. You guys are doing that, so it's just a great story, and hopefully this program grows over time and becomes an even bigger piece of the equation in terms of offering our citizens choice as to how they move and how they and improves our mobility overall. So it's just a great story. Comments and questions?
I'll second the great story thing, and I think it goes back into our messaging as a department, as you guys hear me over and over about communications and making sure that we're being very explicit and on the forefront of our messaging, and making sure that, you know, the taxpayer can truly see, feel, hear, and experience the return on that investment. But a quick question that I had, it was a slide related to the leftovers. I guess there was like a carry forward, like 4.6 million.
There it is.
Yeah, so are there statutory requirements as to how that money can be spent or used, or can you tell us a little bit about that 4.6?
Sure. It's not statutory requirements. We have some requirements in administrative rules as well as guidance. So the intent of enabling providers to have a carry forward is if, for example, they have a large capital project that it's going to take them multiple funding cycles to save the money they need in order to implement the project. In this first cycle, we also had sort of a mix of providers, some who had a need to update their local transit development plans. And so instead of investing a lot of money in new routes when they didn't have a lot of certainty, they made some investments, but also included in their STIF plans, planning projects so that they could get clear about where their investments were most needed. So those were, I think, the main reasons that providers were carrying funds forward to be expended in future cycles.
Got it. 2 years. And then the last one was, how do you ensure that, like, what parameters or what milestones, or how do you essentially audit that these financial impacts will in fact serve these underserved populations? You had some really big numbers on there.
Yes.
Related to those impacts. How do you manage that? How do you administer it? How do you oversee that?
So part of the STIF plan development process and part of the work with advisory committees was coming up with what is a high percentage of low-income household area and providing technical assistance to providers to help them in defining that. And so as we went through the STIF plan review processes, our regional transit coordinators were working with local agencies. They provided some review and oversight to see that the routes that were proposed did in fact meet that definition. So on a quarterly basis now, providers with approved STIF plans will submit quarterly reports, and it's at the project level where they will indicate what they have done. And part of what our job is, and our staff's review job, is to look to see that they're implementing projects consistent with their plans. Mm-hmm. The other piece that we do is we have a independent third-party compliance review process. And so providers are reviewed on average every 3 years currently, and so there's specific things we look at. The legislature also has some specific requirements in terms of submitting their financial audits, submitting their budgets, and so forth. So we have a process there. Marcia, I don't know if you want to add anything from a broader perspective?
Well, I just want to second what Karen noted about part of rolling out this program was also addressing how we're going to do oversight and make sure that we are spending money the way the qualified entities are spending money the way they said they were going to do, and that we are in fact getting some of the outcomes that we planned for. One of the new positions that we were granted by the legislature on my staff as part of this funding is specifically targeted at compliance and oversight, as well as the technical assistance that my staff does regardless.
Great, thanks.
Other questions?
Just a comment. I just want to thank all of you because I know the hard work. I've actually seen the hard work behind the curtain. And to the ODOT staff, you've done an excellent job. Karen, thank you for taking this on, and Jeff for keeping the PTAC on task and making sure it was a heavy lift to get all of this done quickly. And we have regional transportation coordinators who are out in the field working on the backside of this with the transit providers to be able to make it happen. So just want to have you go back and thank all of those people on behalf of the commission, because without you doing the heavy lifting, this wouldn't have happened.
Thank you, Commissioners. So we are going to move to the motions now in response to your request. again, congratulations and keep it going. Our motions on this are a little complicated because we have conflicts of interest declarations, and we're going to start with those, and then that will allow us to go through the motions. So I'm going to ask if there are any actual or potential conflicts that members of the commission want to place on the record, and I think Commissioner Smith has a declaration, and then Commissioner Brown, and then me.
Yes, Sharon Smith, for the record. I am an advisory member, non-voting member of the Metropolitan Planning Organization in Bend, so I have a potential conflict of interest with regard to the funding in Deschutes County programs, so I will not be participating in that discussion or vote.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Brown?
Yes, I am the general manager of the Rogue Valley Transportation District, and I have a conflict of interest with the application from the Rogue Valley Transportation District and will not participate in the approval of the plan.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I want to place on the record a potential conflict of interest that I have because my law firm represents Columbia County and Lincoln County on unrelated matters. Therefore, I'm going to declare a potential conflict of interest and not vote on the Columbia County or Lincoln County matters. So with those declarations in place, I'm hearing conflicts or actual or potential conflicts of interest for the plans for Columbia County, Lincoln County, Rogue Valley Transportation District, and Deschutes County. We will now proceed to take 4 motions to approve your request. Does a member of the commission want to make a motion?
So I move to approve the remaining statewide transportation improvement fund plans as recommended by the Public Transportation Advisory Committee.
So this would exclude Columbia County, Lincoln County, Rogue Valley Transportation District, and Deschutes County. It would be all except those 4. So is there a second to Commissioner Brown's motion?
Second.
The motion's been moved and seconded. Is there further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, we'll move to the second motion, which is at the top of the second page, I believe. It says motion 3, but it's actually motion 2.
I move to approve the remaining statewide transportation improvement fund plans for Columbia County and Lincoln County.
Second?
Second.
I am going to recuse myself from this, as previously stated. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All abstaining? I abstain. Okay, motion 3, which is noted as motion 4.
I will move to approve the statewide transportation improvement fund plan for the Rogue Valley Transportation District.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All abstaining?
I will abstain.
Thank you, Commissioner. And the final motion is at the bottom of the page.
I move to approve the statewide transportation improvement fund plans for Deschutes County.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All abstaining?
I will abstain.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you all very much. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to another decision item. We'll have Assistant Director Brower and ODOT Manager Matthew Harris before us to talk about bonding. Favorite topic.
Chair Van Brockland, members of the commission, for the record, I am still Travis Brower, the Assistant Director of ODOT. And we are here today for a couple of purposes. So you may recall that back earlier in the year, we had a strategic investment workshop, and we covered bonding to a very brief extent, just a couple of slides, a few minutes. And because bonding is such a tremendously fascinating topic, the commission really wanted to dive in deep on this topic. And so we looked for that opportunity. The opportunity presents itself today because it is time for the commission to approve an updated resolution related to our bond program. So that's the context. Some of what we're going to go over today, and when I say we, I mean Matthew, because I'm going to speak very little. I'm here mainly in case there's questions that kind of veer away from the bond program, but we'll let Matthew, as the subject matter expert, talk. But some of what he covers is going to cover a little bit about what we covered previously, but then get into much greater depth about some of the very specifics, particularly the legal requirements around bonding. So I will turn it over to Matthew.
Right. Chair Van Bachman, members of the commission, I am Matthew Harris. I'm the interim debt and quantitative analysis manager at ODOT. Our unit covers basically the public issuance of debt for ODOT, along with some other quantitative analysis matters, mostly relating to indirect cost allocation rates development for the department. It's kind of interesting, the timing of all this being invited out to my hometown in the Dalles, so thank you. I was born and raised here, and it is a little bit intimidating because I think the last time I was at the Civic Auditorium was my prom. I don't think I want to mention what year that was, however. I'm here today just to give you an overview of the department's debt portfolio, what we do for bonding, what's been authorized in the past, what are our plans going forward, what's been authorized by the legislature that has yet to happen, and maybe give you a little bit of an update on where we're at. We're in the middle of a bond sale currently. We are refinancing some of our past prior debt because market conditions are quite favorable to the department at this time. And to kind of wrap it all up, we are asking for approval of Resolution 321, which pledges additional revenue as collateral for our highway bond programs. So, just to give you a quick overview of the major program at ODOT, this is our Highway User Tax Revenue Bond Program. This is the major initiatives, the Oregon Transportation Infrastructure Acts 1, 2, and 3, OTIA, Jobs and Transportation Act of 2009, JTA, and House Bill 2017, which came out of the 2017 legislative session that I'll keep referring to as Keep Oregon Moving, probably interchangeably here. As you may recall, OTIA was ODOT's really first major bonding program out of the modern era. ODOT has done various small issuances over its history, but this was the legislature's first major package. It was $2.4 billion in project funds overall. Just to give you a sense for what we were able to complete with that, we spent roughly a little over $1 billion of those project funds to repair, renovate, fix, or build 365 bridges in the state. The JTA program was $840 million that funded 51 total projects, such as the interchange at Woodburn, the interchange down South Salem outside of my home, I believe the Biggs Junction interchange over here, just a number of great projects along with the Newburgh, Phase 1 of the Newburgh-Dundee bypass. Keep Oregon Moving and House Bill 2017 is the latest major bonding initiative that's been authorized by the legislature. The legislature authorized $480 million in project funds for the named projects. The legislature also authorized $30 million annually for the I-5 Rose Quarter project, which either could be PAYGO or debt service. If we were to issue debt that has debt service payments of $30 million a year, that would be roughly $450 million in project funds, depending on market conditions. Obviously, if rates go up, less funds. If rates go down, more funds, because we're talking total debt service here. And both the timing on both of those sales, particularly the $480 million in project funds, which is the first authorization that we'll proceed with, that is really dependent on the timing of our needs as those projects come online, or project spending particularly comes online. Just a pie chart here showing kind of the size of each of these programs compared to each other, so you can get a sense for how big really OTIA 1, 2, and 3 are compared to JTA, compared to the new Keep Oregon Moving bonds and the Rose Quarter project, along with another fairly major project that is funded by highway funds, where we don't actually pledge our revenues to. We just kind of, these are state general obligation bonds that are paid for with highway funds, and that's facility and GO, so your state radio project, our transportation headquarters, and our DMV headquarters. This will show you the annual amount of debt service that the department is paying and projects to pay over the life of each of these bonding programs. You'll see the smallest one there, the non-OTIA bonds. That's what I was referring to in the prior to OTIA, the OTIA major initiative, where we just had some one-offs here and there. That's mostly bonds that were used to give grants to local governments. You can see the OTIA 1, 2, and 3 program obviously makes up the majority of the debt service that ODOT is paying going forward. JTA was another significant project added on top of that. The Facility and Transportation General Obligation Bonds, as I had mentioned. And then you'll see what we're projecting to add on with Keep Oregon Moving with House Bill 2017. And there are, into the late 2020s, early 2030s, we're projected to pay over $250 million a year in annual debt service, principal and interest. Just to give you a little sense for what else ODOT finances other than our highways, we have the state radio project, as I had mentioned. $189 million in bonding was done for that project. The legislature authorized $30 million for some highway safety improvements. That's a lot of those cable barriers that are going up on I-5, I-84, and some other projects. And then also the legislature had authorized $65 million for the renovation of the ODOT headquarters T building out in Salem. We also have lottery revenue bond authorizations. These are issued by the Department of Administrative Services and funneled to ODOT for the purposes of making grants. The majority of that goes to the Connect Oregon program. Connect 1 through 7, I believe, is $457 million. We've also given some various small grants to the Port of Coos Bay for the Coos Bay Rail Link and their rolling stock. Another major lottery bond that funneled through ODOT was $250 million for the TriMet's light rail extension into Clackamas County. And then we do, a couple of other small grants here and there as the legislature authorizes from time to time. So Salem Kaiser Transit Center through Chariots, the Lane Transit District, just as some examples, and then some various rail spur grants that have been done over the years. So give you a little bit of context about how bonding is authorized. So the legislature ultimately authorizes all debt. We typically have our authorizations as part of a major transportation bill, as you've seen with OTIA, JTA, and now House Bill 2017. We also, so we have the total program authorization in one statute, and then we have every biennium what's called the bond bill. The bond bill carries each biennium's total authorization for projects. So you'll see for ODOT, House Bill 5005 from the 19 legislative session gave us $485 million in bonding authorization. That's $480 for projects plus $5 million for cost of issuance. And then in general, I will mention that all of Oregon's bonding statutes reside in 286A, which covers everything legally around general bonding provisions. 367 is specific to ODOT, if you ever have the desire to have some light reading. So once bonds are authorized by the legislature, so ODOT then has a plan. We know roughly how much we have authorized and for what. So then we need to go out and actually secure those funds in my office. We consult with the State Treasurer's Office. The State Treasurer's Office is the formal issuer of all bonds. I kind of relate it to, I guess since we're in football season now, right? We're essentially the quarterback. We get everything together, we make it all flow. Treasury is more the general manager, the coach. They put the team together, they get everybody where they need to be. We plan internally with our budget manager, with our economist, with highway division to kind of determine what are our project needs, when are those projects coming online, what does our cash flow look like, and then when they are ready to go, our office goes out and actually secures those funds on the public debt markets. And we kind of move those around a little bit based on market conditions, but not too much. It's more dependent on our internal needs, and we also schedule with Treasury around other state bond sales. And so, again, ultimately, we are constrained a little bit in our timing by the State Treasurer's Office. So as I mentioned, the State Treasurer's Office kind of puts together what we call a financing team, which is at the state level. That's ODOT, that's Treasury, and that's the Department of Justice. We also hire a couple of, or an underwriting syndicate. Our lead underwriters are Citi and Morgan Stanley. We have a bond counsel, Oric Harrington Sutcliffe, who has specialized legal experience in the issuance of public debt. We have a municipal advisor, Public Resources Advisory Group, who ensures or helps us to ensure that we get the best pricing on our bond negotiations. And then we also have a trustee and a paying agent that handles the escrow and the like, and that's collectively our financing team. And so we've put together that team to proceed with our Series 2019A and 2019B bond refundings. So any refunding bonds are already authorized by the Transportation Commission under Resolution 314. And also the state legislature has provided authorization under 286A for refinancings. The idea being that refinancings are really dependent on market conditions. They are not new money, so there's no new authorization necessary here. We're just refinancing our debt to lower our total costs over time, right? And so generally, almost 99.9% of the time, refundings are for savings. We are trying to save money when we go out and refinance it. It's kind of like your home mortgage. When rates drop, you can go back to the bank, get a new loan to replace your old loan at a lower rate, and you pay less. It's good financial discipline. Right now, as I mentioned, market rates are incredibly low, and so we have various series that are currently in the money, and we are proceeding with that sale at this time. So just to give you a sense for how low market rates are at, this is the Municipal Market Data Index in historical context. This is, you might be more familiar with, say, U.S. Treasury rates. This is for publicly financed debt. It's a similar indice. We're showing you the 10, 20, and 30-year up here, and you'll see that we are at record lows. The bottom chart shows you that the percent of time we've ever been lower. You can see out late in the curve, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. We are at record lows, and the market could not be better at this time. Actually, it could be better. It could go lower, obviously, right? But that's where we're at. So the Series A is mostly around refinancing, fixing out our variable rate debt. ODOT's variable rate debt has performed quite well over its history. However, we're looking at issuing long-term debt at roughly the equivalent rates that we were paying on our variable. So it is an excellent time to fix that out, and we can revisit variable rate debt in the future. The Series 2019B is refinancing various other series that the department has outstanding, the 12s, 13s, 14s, and 15s. So these also must be done on a taxable basis, because with the legislation, the tax cut legislation that came out of the United States Congress in 2018 eliminated our ability to do these tax exempt. Even issuing them taxable, which are at a little bit higher rate than tax exempt rates, they're still quite good. So we're going to continue to monitor market conditions up until our time of pricing, which hopefully will happen in early November. And some of these series may fall off if interest rates rise, but we do anticipating having some level of savings for the department. So I want to talk a little bit about how our highway user tax program compares to its peers. Our main concern with ODOT in evaluating how strong our program is our credit ratings from the credit rating agencies, S&P, Fitch, and Moody's. S&P gives us their highest rating of a AAA. Moody's and Fitch both give us a AA+ and AA2, which is one notch below that. The reason we get such high ratings is really due to Article 9 of the Constitution, which restricts the use of highway funds for various purposes. So the legislature cannot reallocate those funds in different ways, which gives us some protection. We have excellent coverage on our pledged revenues. This is our fuels tax, our DMV revenues, and our motor carrier revenues that we pledge as collateral for repaying our debt. Our excellent coverage does lead to high ratings, and the fact that we have 3 diverse revenue streams gives us a little bit of, if one were to decline, the other 2 stand strong. Not putting all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. This is just a chart to compare various states. You'll see that Oregon is on sort of the lower end in terms of coverage. This is the amount of revenue that ODOT collects relative to the amount of debt service we pay. So ODOT generally collects 4 times as much revenue as we pay out in debt service. Anything over 3 times is considered very strong by our credit rating agencies. So you'll notice that on the first row there, the minimum coverage required, we pledge to bondholders that we will always maintain 3 or greater on our senior lien, meaning that we will always have at least 3 times as much revenue as debt service, and therefore we are able to secure a strong rating. Arizona, for example, has a little bit stronger pledge than we do and a little bit stronger coverage. However, they do not get a AAA from Standard & Poor's. They're a bit tethered to their state geo, which is shown on the 3rd row there. And what you'll find is that because the state of Oregon itself is a very strong credit, it naturally allows ODOT to kind of go one up the scale on the state itself in some regards, which gives, again, another, shows us strong relative to our peers. But we're never going to be Texas up there. The chart actually only goes up to 10 times coverage for Texas, but they are very close to 20. And it's just, we'll never be able to pull oil out of the ground here, right? So we're a little bit of a disadvantage, and that's why they'll always be a AAA, whereas ours is a little bit bigger of a lift. So again, our highway user tax pledge revenues, they are the basis of the security behind our bonds. They are critical to everything that we do in my unit. Having a robust pledge revenue, again, leads to high ratings. Can't stress that enough. We have 2 liens. The senior, which we, again, pledged that would maintain 3 times coverage. We opened up a subordinate lien for the variable rate debt where we could go down to 2 times coverage. That just gives ODOT additional flexibility if we had the need to issue more debt in the future. It kind of allows for a little bit extra capacity. But our ratings would be lower on a senior lien, so we don't tend to utilize that too much. What I wanted to bring in front of you is Resolution 321. It adds certain pledge revenues, or certain revenues to the pledge from House Bill 2017. The reason why we haven't pursued this earlier is because we actually needed a technical cleanup fix in the 18 session just to allow for these revenues to formally be pledged because the legislation was unclear whether or not we could do so. That has been clarified, and now we can proceed. These are the additional title and registration fees for high mileage per gallon vehicles that are being collected by DMV. This is normally something that we would include as kind of a technical cleanup to just, because we pledge essentially all of our DMV fees, all of our motor carrier revenues, and almost all of our fuels tax revenues as collateral for our bonds, and this just kind of wraps that little bit extra in to maintain the security behind it. And so if the commission were to approve Resolution 321, we will proceed with executing a 17th supplemental to our amended and restated highway user tax bond declaration. This is the kind of the legal formal document that investors can rely on as their backdrop for why they should invest in our bonds. It's our promise, it's our legally binding promise to pay them with these revenues. And I believe you do have a draft of that that was prepared by Ora Carrington and the Department of Justice available for reference. And I think with that, I can answer any questions that you might have about our bonding program. I know we left a lot of time just for Q&A.
Thank you very much. Are questions from the commission? I just had one. So the 3-to-1 debt equity ratio,
yes,
basically what you're talking about, is that, remind me of the authority, is that constitutional, statutory, by policy?
So
how is that set?
Yeah, that was originally established by policy back when the OTIA program was first engaged with. We, from my understanding, engaged with our banking team, DOJ, our municipal advisor, and our attorneys to kind of determine what is the appropriate ratio that would garner us as higher ratings as possible and be able to issue debt as cheaply as possible. Mm-hmm. And this compares very well to other DOTs across the country. You'll notice back in my previous slide that most other DOTs have a 2 times, 3 times, or 4 times, pledge revenue coverage.
And how close are we to the 3-to-1? In other words, is there any capacity?
So at this current time, we are at, I believe, 4.3 times coverage with our latest public figures. Those will shift slightly with, we obviously have House Bill 2017, Keep Oregon Moving revenues coming in, but we have not yet issued the debt for that, so our capacity will rise. However, it will come back down as we do the new bonding, but we're roughly, I would say, just over 4 times.
Okay.
The other reason, beyond just from a purely ratings perspective of the coverage ratio that's really important, is that the money that is not going to debt service, for the most part, is going to maintenance, the day-to-day maintenance of the system. And so to the extent that we put more into debt service, it provides less money for that basic maintenance of the system. So there are both financial reasons to do so, and also just from a basic operations of the system, it's important as well to limit the portion of the revenue going into debt service.
Right. I would add that also the state of Oregon itself only utilizes 5% of its revenue as a target for debt service. So it's much different between, how you're approaching it. Because as Travis mentioned, those revenues that go to debt service do not go out to the system.
So, and are we issuing primarily GOs, or do we issue revenue bonds, other types of bonds?
We issue primarily highway user tax revenue bonds. We are, as I mentioned, a AAA credit on our own, so we do not need the wrapping of a GO pledge in most cases.
Okay.
There are times when the legislature may elect to utilize general obligation bonds to fund certain projects, or if we were ever to have, for whatever reason, a project that needed that additional security. It's possible, but it's not something that we typically do.
Thank you. Commission ready to vote?
Yes.
If so, I'd entertain a motion.
I move to approve. Help if I turn the thing on.
Commissioner Calery.
I move to approve resolution number 321, amending the Master Highway User Tax Revenue Bond Declaration.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you both. We are eerily on schedule, so we will take a 10-minute break.